Dragon Quest Monsters is a monster taming RPG that has always held a special place in my heart, and I've generally been pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed the titles in the previous Joker series. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince left me oddly confused and dissatisfied for a game which at moments had me more hooked than a hilarious pirate treasure hunt. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince, developed by Tosei and published by Square Enix for the Nintendo Switch, is the 7th game in the Dragon Quest Monsters series following Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3, and the first to be released outside of Japan since Joker 2 in 2011. Set before the events of Dragon Quest IV, the story follows the journey of Saro, a half-human, half-monster prince, and the main antagonist from Dragon Quest IV. Immediately, the Dark Prince attempts to immerse players into its vibrant anime aesthetic thanks to the unmistakable art style crafted by the legendary mangaka Akira Toriyama. The characters and monsters come to life with a unique charm. However, it's worth noting that while the visual art style has a few rare moments of beauty, it's often not that appealing. Monster designs themselves are instantly recognizable and iconic to longtime series fan, but I must admit that personally, I've never been too partial to them, and I find preserving the angles and body shapes used for the monsters in previous 2D incarnations of the game look frankly terrible on a 3D model. Combat animations are low quality and barely manage to convey a satisfying physicality to the classic turn-based fare it provides, and the character animations during cutscenes are stiff, doll-like, and feel like a rushed job. Punctuate all of this with textures and color palettes that look like a small child's imaginary friend vomited their cancerous innards everywhere, and we can safely call the overall graphical quality of the game polarizing at best. Saro is on a quest to defeat his father, the cruel monster king and ruler of Naderia, Randolfo the Tyrant, who cursed him to be unable to cause harm to any monster. Bent on revenge, Saro vows to lift the curse, return to Naderia, and usurp Randolfo. It's only after he takes refuge in the human village of Rose Hill where he finds a loophole to his inability to harm monsters in the art of monster wrangling. By becoming a monster master, he can have his allies defeat monsters for him, thus circumventing his curse, and giving him a way to fight against his enemies. Saro soon meets a fugitive elf who he names Rose, as she doesn't have one of her own because reasons. Rose very quickly and almost fanatically becomes the primary love interest, and she accompanies Saro and allows him entry to Naderia with the help of some shiny colored stones and her unique elf magic, which is different from other kinds of magic, because elves. The storyline follows classic shonen anime tropes, and the pacing is commendable, but it was written in such a predictable and unengaging fashion that it made it seem less than an afterthought and more like another box to tick to be able to give it JRPG status. Nevertheless, the narrative told mostly through dialogue-filled cutscenes and reliant on overly familiar story beats and shallow character archetypes serves its purpose as a supporting framework to draw players into the world and gameplay of Dragon Quest Monsters. That nicely leads us into the meat of the experience, the gameplay. The starter monster selection process adds an intriguing layer, with a quiz determining your starter monster. This unique approach allows for flexibility, letting players reconsider their choice until it's officially confirmed, but doesn't really have much impact beyond the first couple of hours of gameplay. Wild monsters roaming the map and classic turn-based combat give the familiar yet enjoyable feel you would expect from a DQM game. And that combat is your standard turn-based JRPG fare, which revolves around using a team of monsters to battle against your enemies as you progress through the story. Your active team can have up to 8 members at a time, up to 4 in your main party and 4 more in reserve. Like in many monster taming games, you can issue precise orders in combat to each individual monster, choosing from all of their available abilities from the talents they have. You can set general tactics such as show no mercy, focus on healing, and support your allies, leaving your monsters to decide the specifics, which is the same format for combat during the game's 2 separate Colosseum-type areas. Outside of battle, you can set move-specific instructions for your monster's AI in the Set Instructions menu. This is where you can choose which moves a monster will use, will avoid, or will only use some of the time, providing an extra layer of strategy to how your monsters will perform in combat. Additionally, the player can use items to support their team or harm and hinder their foes once per turn. Finally, your monsters may occasionally enter a frenzied state, where they'll inflict greater damage and gain additional opportunities to act in combat, which can make the difference between victory and defeat. There are multiple ways to grow your monster collection. You can leave it to luck and wait for an enemy monster to join you after battle, or find an unhatched egg in the wild. But more often than not, you'll be using the scout command in combat against wild monsters, which lets your team make a show of force and try to persuade them to join you. When scouting monsters like this, the game will use the highest stat out of strength or wisdom when calculating the chance to succeed, and reducing the enemy's HP will also increase the scout chance, and you can increase it further by using abilities that reduce your opponent's defense or by increasing your own attack or wisdom stats. There's also a somewhat annoying delay mechanic used to slow the player's progression by making monsters found in a particular zone harder to scout before you complete that area. Finally, players can also use items such as meat-based treats to increase the likelihood of a monster wanting to join you, as well as increase the chance of success of your show of force. The synthesis system, another staple of the series, provides depth, allowing for the creation of diverse and powerful monster teams, and I often found myself losing hours to the grind trying to unlock some of the game's most powerful talents. Synthesis lets you combine two monsters to create a new one, and the synthesis system has supposedly been overhauled for the Dark Prince, and now features more monster combinations and some genuinely helpful quality of life mechanics that both longtime fans and new players alike would appreciate, such as the reverse synthesis option that brings up a list of monsters that can be unlocked through synthesis based on what the player already has in their collection. Synthesized monsters have 1/4 of the parent's monster stats, and stat growth is locked per monster species and aren't affected by synthesis. And synthesized monsters also receive half of the skill points of its parents rounded down, so if a skill point is passed down, it keeps half of the sum of its parents' allocated points. If it's not passed down, half of the allocated points are passed down as unallocated points. That is a lot of maths. But the real secret to the synthesis system is inheritable talents, which can then unlock more powerful talents. Talents are a set of spells and abilities that you gradually unlock by assigning talent points a monster earns through leveling up or other means. There are 3 broad categories of talent, and each one contains a mix of skills, magic spells, attribute boosters, and other abilities. When a monster is synthesized, it comes with its own innate talent and can also inherit talents from its parents. Understanding how talents can be combined through synthesis is really the key to creating the most powerful monsters you can. And I really enjoyed that the numerous talents that can be acquired provided the player with a wealth of flexibility when it came to monsters and team build. Some talents even have advanced versions you can unlock by having enough points in the base skill to have it maxed out with a single parent, or by adding both the total invested points in a particular talent from both parents during synthesis, which is another lot of math. But some of the rarer, more powerful talents can only be unlocked by combining other maxed out skills in parent monsters and synthesizing them together into a new creature with the upgraded talent available to select on their talent inheritance list. To add further complexity and maths to creating the ultimate monster and team, monsters can come in 2 different sizes, small or large. Small monsters take up 1 slot in your team roster, while large monsters require 2 slots, allowing for a party of 4 small monsters, 2 large ones, or 2 small and 1 large monster. Not only do large monsters have higher attributes than their small counterparts, they can also act multiple times per round during battle. Lastly, monsters are assigned one of 9 ranks, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, S, or X, from lowest to highest. Rank is attached to the monster's type and can't be changed, and acts as a rough guide of the monster's quality. Rank S monsters are where you'll find many familiar antagonists from the series, but supposedly the most powerful monsters exclusively occupy Rank X. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince boasts 6 themed zones split between 17 explorable areas. This at first feels like it would quickly and effectively mitigate the lack of an open world to explore and be immersed in by having wide-ranging and interesting locations to play in. But the more I played, the more claustrophobic I felt. Each area's maps are frankly uninspired, boring, ugly, and serve only to hold wild monster encounters and plot-required boss fights. Each of these areas have typical JRPG dungeons to play through before a boss encounter, but these dungeons vary from being confusing and unentertaining rat warrens to obvious single-road routes which also fail to engage or entertain. In both sets of dungeons, I often got myself turned around just through the sheer sameness of all the textures being used, making differentiating one corridor pathway from another far more difficult than it had any right to be. An interesting, if only partially effective mechanic is the incorporation of seasons, which dynamically alter the environment around you. The changing seasons not only impact the appearance of zones, but also influence weather patterns, the variety of wild monsters encountered, and new areas to reach that you couldn't before. Further to the explorable zones and story-based locations, the player will have access to two battle areas, the Endor Colosseum in the human world of Terrestria, and the Mauloseum in the monster realm of Nadiria. Opponents in these arenas are expert monster wranglers in their own right, and simply auto-battling through them without any thought to team composition, stats, talents, and strategy will often end in losing the match as well as some of your goals. As anticipated from a long-standing franchise, The Dark Prince boasts solid, if not the highest quality production values. The iconic music with its recognizability and evocative nature transports the player into the fantasy world of Dragon Quest well enough, but other than a few of those more recognizable themes, none of the music left much of an impression on me throughout my playthrough. Japanese voice actors add an extra layer of authenticity to the anime aesthetic, delivering performances that genuinely elevate the lukewarm narrative. However, the disparity between the Japanese and English voiceovers may create a dissonance, with the latter sometimes sounding more suited to a far younger audience compared to what would be expected for a game with some oddly dark tones and potentially affecting the immersion for some players. Players can also choose a voiced or silent protagonist, although it didn't significantly impact cutscenes in my experience of the game. Okay, let's address the grind factor, because there's a lot of it, because Dragon Quest Monsters and the Dragon Quest franchise by extension is a fairly grind-heavy JRPG and caters to players who enjoy that kind of gameplay. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I'm not the biggest fan of grind-heavy gameplay. To mitigate that, the game features auto-battles and a variety of XP booster items, ease the repetitive nature of leveling. However, the Mole Dungeon DLC introduces a layer of concern. While undeniably convenient, the decision to sell this separately raises eyebrows, as this specific DLC content provides a boost in synthesizing and team building by giving the player access to a set of dungeons that spawn monsters you've ever owned, either through capture or synthesis. But the separation of that from the main game begs the question of the intention behind such DLC practices and how it might impact the overall purchasing experience for players. I, for one, can't help but feel that this is a particularly scummy tactic attached to a game that has very clearly been rushed together, as opposed to something that's been carefully crafted with the intent of providing a high-quality product. Alright, it's time to sum up and summarize. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince undoubtedly has its strengths, particularly for fans of the series. The strategic combat, intricate mechanics, and overall anime aesthetic contribute to a reasonably satisfying, if somewhat stale, gaming experience. However, it doesn't break new ground, and the dungeons, while functional, lack the captivating charm found in other aspects of the game. It stands as a reliable addition to the franchise, offering a solid experience without necessarily pushing the boundaries of the genre, which is incredibly disappointing in a time where even the much vaunted and heavily stagnated Pokemon franchise has shown the ability to try new things. And I do have concerns that the level of grind and some of those scummier DLC practices may be potential drawbacks for players who are newer to the genre or franchise. So if you are a DQM fan, then you know exactly what to expect, and this is a solid purchase for your Nintendo Switch. But if you're not, and you are a new player, then maybe think about grabbing it when it's on sale instead, because Dragon Quest Monsters is a monster taming game worth giving a go, despite its many avoidable flaws. I really enjoy seeing you all share your thoughts in the comments and responding to them when I have a chance, so do me a favor and keep pressing the thumbs and telling me what parts of my videos are better than others. It really helps me get better at making these, and I really appreciate all the constructive feedback you can share, so keep it coming. And as always, my people, take care of yourselves.